Holy crap, it's the Prime Minister.
Hi, Samantha.
Hi, Mr. Prime Minister. It's nice to virtually meet you. Thanks
Uh,
for joining us.
no, listen, so glad to, and want to start by saying thanks for all the amazing work you and your team have been doing these past months of connecting with young people and getting them sort of engaged in really, really important ways through this tough time and as we build for a future.
Well, it's so exciting to have you here, and thank you so much for saying that. I know our team will really appreciate it. So you're here in our house on social media. We want to make sure that you know that while we get that traditional debates and stuff are set up a certain way, we're trying to not do that. Like the whole point of the vibe check is to talk about what you are going to do, how you want to lead, and sort of get down to who you are and to figure that out. So hopefully you'll join us in doing that.
I can't
So
wait, and I really hope I'm able to meet you where you are because I spend a lot of time where I'm supposed to be, and being able to actually be real with you guys is something I'm really excited about.
I'm really pumped for that as well. So our first question is, on our project, we do a lot of work around identifying what our volunteers' superpowers are and matching it with people whose superpowers make up for the weaknesses of that person. So what is the Liberal Party and your superpowers, and what is its weaknesses?
I think our superpower is that we draw together and include Canadians from every corner of the country of every different background. You know, we've long been recognized that the Liberal Party is the party of immigration, and that's nice, and that has allowed us to have an incredibly diverse team. And I think those diverse perspectives in creating solutions has been really, really positive. The weakness that goes with it, though, is we are a party that's been around for 150 years, and therefore the set in their ways approach, the history that we were in power when residential schools were being opened, we were in power when the St. Louis was turned back, we were in power when all sorts of dark moments of our country that didn't include people happened, and sort of figuring out how we can continue to be reinventing ourselves while taking responsibility and learning for, you know, what happened over the past 150 years that the Liberal Party was a part of, while saying, okay, now we're bringing in a whole new generation and a whole new set of perspectives to solve these challenges.
So when you think about your weaknesses, how do you plan to match that with sort of the superpowers of maybe other parties, other leaders, other people with lived experience? I feel like that's something we try to do all the time in the project. So I feel like I want to know if that's something our government would be into doing as well.
It is something that has been at the core of what I did when I decided to step up into active politics. And when my dad was a politician, everyone knew I was a liberal, everything, but I'd stayed away from active politics as a young person. And when I decided to get in, I looked at the Liberal Party and its structures and the dinosaurs in the party and sort of said, okay, we need to change things around. And I went out to get young people in. And that ability to bring in young people, to get people excited and not just stuffing envelopes, but actually creating policy and driving things. I mean, legalization of cannabis, same-sex marriage, those were always driven by young people in the party. How do you get even more young people to realize that politics is a way of changing the world? I mean, we see young people getting involved in various NGOs and various causes because, yes, pushing back against things are important. It's slower to change things in politics, but it's also really powerful, and it only happens if you get in young people. So for me, the way I've reached out is to bring as many impassioned, challenging young people as possible into the party to disrupt those systems that have been in place for too long.
Well, yeah, that's awesome. I'm really glad to hear that. I know our time with you is short, so even though I have loads of more follow-up questions, I'm going to keep running through these. So this past year has been like a dumpster fire. In addition to the global pandemic, Canadians have been through a lot this year. We watched the brutal murder of George Floyd. We saw a domestic terrorist attack happen in, sorry, my dog's barking. The domestic terrorist attack against a Muslim family in London, Ontario. And we saw Canadians collectively become aware of the truth of Canada's treatment of Indigenous communities. Yet, and like all three of these events are rooted in white supremacy, and yet that really hasn't been a topic during this campaign. we haven't really seen it like be center stage. And it felt like if any year was going to take this and dismantle white supremacy as a big campaign topic, it would be this one. And I guess I wanted to create space to ask you, what are you going to be doing to dismantle white supremacy, not only as a leader, but in your life and in our country?
Well, first of all, I have to recognize that the system that we're part of is designed to advance people who look like me from my kind of background, and I am benefiting from inherent pathways and advantages that are totally unfair. I remember at one point saying, yeah, the system's broken, we need to fix it. And someone corrected me and said, no, Justin, the system's not broken. The system is working exactly the way it was designed to work, to help people who look like you become, in power. We need to change the system. We need to build a different system. And for that, we've done lots, but the big thing is, I'm not necessarily the best person to say what that new system needs to be. I think by definition, I'm probably not, but I can use the power that I've been able to achieve to empower others to do it. So when we're trying to redesign childcare in a way that supports families, we turn to Ahmed Hussein, who came to Canada as a Somali refugee who lived in challenging parts of Toronto and actually was able to achieve a tremendous amount and now is shaping the country for everyone. Mariam Mosef, who is our Women and Gender Equity Minister, her family fled the Taliban, so she knows how important it is to continue to fight and to push back. Mary Ng is our Minister of International Trade and Small Businesses. We have people who have those perspectives and those experiences that don't embody everyone, because no one person embodies everyone, but have an understanding and a connection to the lived reality of so many Canadians. And that ability to put forward an incredibly diverse team is what's really exciting. For the first time in 20 years, we might be able to elect a Filipino candidate to the House of Commons. We have 4 of them across the country. That's a community that has been out in front during this pandemic that should be heard in the House of Commons. So I empower the country to move forward by making sure I'm lifting up extraordinary leaders.
I think that's really awesome. I also think that white supremacy has been around forever, and only now is a discussion topic, finally. But you were in office for 6 years. So
Yep.
do you have stuff that reflects that you've been working on that for 6 years? Because I'd love to know that.
Yeah. Well, a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, we were the first government in Canada, its history, to recognize anti-Black racism explicitly, recognize systemic discrimination and unconscious bias, and commit to working against it, to recognize the UN Decade of People of African Descent, move forward on anti-Black racism, for example, in a really concrete way, not just the justice side of things and the mandatory minimums, which we're moving forward on, but also saying the Black community said, we need better access to capital. Our entrepreneurs can't get loans to start businesses. So we turned around and created a $400 million entrepreneurship fund for Black communities. On moving forward on reconciliation, for example, or Islamophobia. We recognized with M103 in the House that Islamophobia was real and we needed to fight against it. And Iqra Khalid, our MP who put it forward, got horrible hate, not just from the right wing, but from conservative MPs who were telling her she shouldn't be recognizing that. Now, fortunately, a few years later, even conservatives are recognizing Islamophobia. We've made changes. But the thing with that kind of change is it's nowhere near enough. There's so much more to do. And that's why I'm excited about the fact that we have 20 Black candidates running for us across the country, 4 Filipino candidates, 25 Indigenous candidates, a huge number of others as well, 9 Chinese Canadian. I mean, I don't want to get listy, but this idea of making sure that the government and the institutions within government don't not just look like Canada, but are empowered to bring forward the perspectives and the lived reality of Canadians is so important. I mean, the conversation around George Floyd, where we saw millions of Canadians suddenly waking up to the lived reality of microaggressions and little acts of racism that every racialized Canadian faces and just doesn't talk about. And now, you know, I remember through that stretch and the car door with the indigenous peoples and all the videos and stuff, there was a moment where people who haven't experienced that were having to realize that, wow, the Canada that I live in is very different from the Canada that my friend, who has a very similar life to me on the outside, actually experiences, because she faces these discriminations on a daily basis that she doesn't talk about or complain about, and certainly doesn't want to spend all her time trying to explain to her white friends about. You know, the challenges that we have is that you can't just say you're an ally. You have to be an ally, and you have to be there to support. And that's hard, and it requires a real reflection about your own privilege. That is an uneasy question for a lot of people to grapple with. But the thing that frustrates me is the number of times I've seen racialized members of our team, or whatever, have to reassure people that they're not racist, even though they live in a racist system, and sort of comfort people as they're discovering, oh my God, am I a bad person because I did this or did that? Well, I shouldn't be having to forgive you or explain you. We should just figure out how to move forward. And that understanding is one that I came to partially because I've had the privilege of sitting down with amazing Black and Indigenous and Islam and Muslim staffers and teams on the hill that have shared to me in very safe ways the things that they go through, even in a place like the House of Commons, where you know, if there's 5 of them walking in, the security guards are only going to triple check the woman in the hijab or whatever. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, I think that's such a great segue into my next question, actually, because before I started this project, I worked in nonprofits, I did all this stuff, and I didn't realize how much these spaces are centered around whiteness, and how it doesn't really matter if you have a seat at the table if you're not hearing the voices of the people. And I think, and I know she's an NDP MP, but I think a lot of Mumalakakak who, regardless of party affiliation, her saying that, you know, she doesn't feel safe walking into work, that, like, I think about that on a daily basis. So I guess, you know, it's one thing to have a diverse team, and I love that. I hear that commitment from you. But how do you hope to make people, especially those with different lived experience, feel like they belong, and not that they're forced to fit in, which is two very different feelings?
One of the things that we really emphasize is creating safe spaces and sub-caucuses, so that the Black caucus can get together and the Indigenous caucus can talk about those challenges and then bring them back to the larger group, and have that combination of safe space, but also have allies come join and listen and learn, and creating opportunities for people to actually share their experiences. Because the first thing is realizing, okay, wait, it's not just me that's seeing this. It's not just me as an individual that's feeling this. You know, all of my colleagues who share our background are going through this as well. Well, that's something we have to change, and looking at those ways of empowering. The other thing is, I mean, I have learned more by being able to sit down with those groups. After the Afzal family was murdered in London, I sat down with about 100 different young Muslim staffers across all different offices in our government, just to hear them, to hear their anguish and their fear, and the fact that, oh my God, this is the country that I work for, that I love, that I live, that I've been part of, that I was born in. And now I have to worry every time I go out with wearing my hijab or whatever, because I'm visibly Muslim, and I'm at risk from a tiny minority that doesn't represent the country. But at the same time, that hateful rhetoric is real, and it's spreading. And being able to hear that and hear the urgency on that is really important for me, but it's also important for them to be able to be heard, and to put forward concrete suggestions and recommendations on what we can do and what we need to do more and even faster.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome. And I know you know this too, but, like, you know, I'm a woman of color. Those people are Muslim Canadians. even when it's not, hasn't been a domestic terrorist attack, right? And like, I think that's the part that scares me. Like, I grew up wanting to work in government. I wanted to do that. And now I'm terrified of being in those spaces because I don't want to code switch anymore. I don't want to be centered around stuff. I don't want to feel harmed. But I'm hearing from you that making people feel like they belong is really important.
I mean, what we've seen though is, I mean, when the Quebec City mosque attack happened, you know, the horrible images out of Christchurch, people are like, okay, well, maybe it's risky to go to mosques, or maybe it's risky to go to our place of worship or to gather. But what London showed is maybe it's risky to go for a walk in the evening, and it becomes just, you know, no, this is not our country. This is not what we're going to accept. And we have to be so much better at being, all of us, there to understand that lived reality and push back against it everywhere, because I need you, Samantha, to be stepping up, to getting involved in politics with whatever party. I want you to know that you can and you should create your place and lead, because politics is about pushing boundaries and seeing where there are gaps and stepping forward and saying, no, you know what, I'm going to dive in and I'm going to push hard on the system. And it's tough. You're always pushing an envelope a little bit, but you need it. It shouldn't be so tough that you despair or feel unsafe. And that's where making sure that those people who are brave enough to stand up and put their hand up and say, I believe in using all the tools possible to change this world for the better, but I'm not having to risk myself, my identity, or my mental health to be able to do it.
Well, no, thank you for understanding that. I know that we were only able to get a half an hour with you, but
we got a few more minutes. Don't end it too quick. I want to keep going on this.
Awesome.
We got another good 9-10 minutes. Let's go to 1:05.
Oh my gosh, amazing. Okay,
no,
cool.
No, this is good.
How do you work to identify your own biases, and how do you plan on addressing them when you're making decisions?
I listen. I listen. As many people remember, I was called out quite rightly for having done things in the past, including blackface and brownface, that were absolutely wrong. And it was a moment where I had to confront the fact that I did something that, regardless of intent doesn't matter. It was an action that hurt deeply people who thought I was an ally, who want to have me be an ally. And that grappling with the fact that even though I deeply believe and I'm comfortable knowing that I'm a good person and that I'm supportive and I'm an ally in all these different ways, I have massive blind spots like all of us do. And the only way to get through that is to acknowledge what mistakes you've made, listen to learn about the mistakes that you've made that you didn't even know you made and you don't know about, and be genuine about understanding the impacts and the meaning of it, but also what you can do to counter, not just atone for that mistake, but change the system that has people making mistakes like that. And it's not to absolve myself of any personal responsibility, but I am in a situation where I do get to change the narrative, that I do get to bring things forward and highlight things and have me be an example of someone who did terrible things and chooses to make it right by going at collective understanding of what is right and wrong. And it starts with listening, it starts with acknowledging, it starts with being vulnerable to the fact that you're not perfect, that no one's perfect, and we all have lots to learn. And that's what I've committed to doing. And quite frankly, having amazing leaders around the cabinet table who very much share my ideal for a better or fairer Canada, but know much more than me from their experience where the real unfairnesses lie, and learning from them. And when we have a discussion around anything from gun control to mandatory minimums to medical assistance in dying, the perspectives brought forward that aren't just left or right or religious or non-religious, but okay, this particular racialized community, how are we going to make sure that that they who are discriminated against regularly, systemically within a health system are actually getting the protections that they need on something as delicate as medical assistance in dying. Well, being able to bring in a racialized angle and a vulnerable angle in that conversation is much better, and only happens when you have a full range of voices around a cabinet table. And that's where that diversity in our party, in our government, is so, so important to me.
Well, that's really good to hear, sir. One of our other questions, since we have a couple more minutes, is I think about how Canada reacted so quickly during this pandemic. You know, we were like, we got to handle this. This is a crisis. We got to take action. And that's, first of all, like, thank you, because, you know, it was terrifying. But on the other end, I think about all the other crises that are going on, like the climate crisis, or the fact that we're a wealthy country and there are communities that don't have clean water. And, you know, the opioid crisis. There's so much going on that we need to deal with, kind of at the same speed at which we dealt with the pandemic. And like, it just feels like I know it's the system, but like I feel like it needs to like evolve and happen faster, because like time is of the essence with these issues. And
I have a big grin right now, because that's exactly what I've been thinking of over these past months. The fact is, I mean, you talk about the pandemic, and like I'd come out of my house and talk to Canadians who were freaked out, as we all were, about what do you mean you're shutting down the economy? What do you mean I have to stay home? What do you mean I don't get to go to work anymore? It's like, oh my God, the world is ending. And we knew we had to both reassure and inform and be there. We got the CERB out right away. We supported people. We also moved forward when we got vaccines to specifically vaccinate northern communities faster than anyone else because of the vulnerabilities there. So we were thinking about that. But one of the reasons why we're in an election right now is because through this pandemic, I learned, wow, if you need to set up a CERB that's going to help 8 million Canadians in 2 weeks, you can. You can actually push the levers of government really hard, and people within government will respond and get it done. Well, let's take that intensity and drive to do really big things quickly that we learned during this pandemic, and apply it to the climate crisis, to the crisis of reconciliation, to the housing crisis, to everything. And in order to do that, we have to start now. But that is a really big decision to take. Like, I'm planning on going so much harder, so much faster on climate change, which is why top climate scientists have given us an 8 out of 10, and actually gave the NDP a 2 out of 10, because you can't just have ambition, you have to have a realizable plan. And you listen to science on climate change, and the science is saying we've got the right plan, but we're going to have to push really, really hard using those same kinds of levers we did during the pandemic. And that's where I want to check in with Canadians. And that's why young people who care about climate need to get out and vote. On reconciliation, yes, we made a promise to end all boil water advisories. There were 105 when we came into office. We've now lifted 116 of them, with a few dozen still to go. But there's a plan, and there's the funding, and there's the project leaders in every community that's going to get them done. But it's hard, and we have to push harder and go faster. And that is what I learned, and what our government learned during this pandemic, that, wow, we can go even faster. And going faster, we can't wait a year or 2 years for the official election date. We have to do it now. That's why this moment to get out and vote and say, yeah, we go forward, not backwards, is so important, with a tangible plan to do it. And I'm super excited about that. But we've got to make the right choice on Monday.
Yeah, I feel you. Like, I want action, quick action around these things. And I know our community does too. And I think what I also really would love to see happen is like conversations that are less on consumers and more on big businesses and corporations, because like, I reduce and reuse and recycle, sir. I do it all the time. I feel like I've done my part. What are big businesses doing? And that's what I really like to see some like change around. And I mean, that's
two things. First of all, we're putting an absolute cap on oil and gas sector emissions. They are not going to be able to increase their emissions, and indeed, they're going to start decreasing their emissions. Even as we still need oil and gas for the next few years, they're going to decrease their emissions to get to net zero. Part of that is making sure that 100% of cars are zero-emission vehicles by 2035, all new cars. But the other thing we're doing is on plastics. We banned single-use plastics, and we're going to force companies that use plastics to put in place a recycling plan, a full circular economy approach to make sure if you're selling someone a plastic bottle, you have to have a concrete and effective plan to get that plastic bottle recycled once they've ditched it wherever they've ditched it. And that is putting it on companies to show that leadership. And we're getting a bit of pushback, of course, but we need that solution, and Canadians are demanding it. And that's why we're pushing hard against that, that drive for profits over planet.
Well, thank you. I really, really appreciate that. We did have one more question, but I feel like you're tight on your schedule.
One's quick. I'll squeeze it in quick. I'll try to answer slow. Sorry, my answers get long, so
no,
we'll
it's
do
all
this
right.
one last one.
I appreciate the thought. So our last question is, what is something you unlearned this past year, and how will you use this new understanding in decisions from now on?
One of the first things I did as Prime Minister was attend the report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The 94 recommendations, the pages and pages of recommendations. It was like 5-6 years ago. And it was a moment where, the truth about reconciliation, the truth around residential schools and kids ripped from their homes was out. And I was like, oh God, now that's great. We can continue to work on reconciliation together. And then this past spring, as unmarked graves were found, Canadians were like, oh my God, this is happening in Canada. And I'm like, well, wait, you guys were supposed to know that. Indigenous people have known that for years. People who've worked on reconciliation knew this was happening, but Canadians were suddenly really awakened to the fact in a way that, quite frankly, I thought people already knew. And that sort of reminded me that reconciliation isn't just about doing the right things with Indigenous peoples as a government. It's about really including all Canadians in the learning, the understanding of what reconciliation is, and that we all, non-Indigenous Canadians, have a big role to play in moving forward. So even as we're acting, one of the things we've been working on for the past few years, that the timing was sort of fortunate that we were able to announce it in Cowessess a few weeks after those graves were found, that Child and Family Services is going to be restored to the community. The kids won't be taken out of their community when they're at risk to put into the provincial system in foster homes that don't have the language, don't have the culture. We've empowered Cowessess First Nation to actually care for its kids at risk in their own way. That's a huge thing that we worked years to do, but that work that we were doing there is one that Canadians should understand and know and be part of as well. And that, where I had to unlearn, was I sort of thought that there was a better level of understanding about it. And it's on me, it's on all of us, that we weren't bringing Canadians along enough on the stories of reconciliation. Because even as we talk reconciliation, people emphasize on, this tragedy or that lack of housing or this problem. And there's lots of problems and lots of tragedies out there to talk about in the news. But there are also good stories, like tens of thousands of kids who started in new schools, 116 boil water advisories lifted. Like, those are good stories. They don't get as much coverage. And we need to be telling the full story of both the tragedies and the positives. And I think unlearning or understanding that people don't absorb information the same way or from traditional media sites. And if I give a speech on it, it doesn't mean people heard that speech. Really thinking about, like we're doing here today with you, Samantha, sharing through ways to go meet Canadians where they are in what we're talking about, as opposed to expecting them to come to me, to government, to official channels. That's something I'm still struggling with. Lots more to unlearn, but I'm open to doing it, and I'm so happy to be here with you today to be able to do that.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister. And if you ever need help reaching young people, we're here. So.
I know, that's part of why I'm here, and I look forward to continuing this conversation in the future as well.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for being here on this call. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.